Now, picture this. You are standing on a sun-baked dirt track in the Ozark Mountains during the absolute peak of August. The air hanging over the ridge is a thick, oppressive wall of heat, 105 degrees Fahrenheit, in the shade, with a heat index making it feel closer to 115. Asphalt on the county road down below is literally turning back into liquid tar. If you step off the grass onto bare dirt, the heat radiates through the soles of your boots like an open oven door. Then, you turn toward a jagged aperture, cut into the side of a gray limestone bluff. You take just 3 steps past the rock threshold. Instantly, the oppressive weight of the atmosphere vanishes. The searing glare of the sun drops into a soft, cool twilight. The heat haze dissipates. A steady breeze sweeps across your face, carrying the mineral scent of wet rock, and a temperature reading that seems almost physically impossible. 54 degrees Fahrenheit. No solar panels humming on a roof. No split-unit air conditioner buzzing against a wall. No grid connection anywhere for 10 miles. Just a stable, dark, icy breath rising from millions of tons of solid calcium carbonate rock. Deep inside this subterranean recess sits a fully finished tiny home. It looks like a modern mountain retreat. Warm cedar trim, clean steel lines, glowing Edison bulbs. Outside, the surface weather is swinging wildly between lethal summer heat waves and sub-zero winter blizzards. Inside, the ambient temperature barely shifts a single degree all year long. It sounds like the ultimate off-grid paradise. But building a home inside a mountain isn't just a clever architectural trick. It is a thermodynamic war. Step into a cave with a hammer, a load of timber, and a standard home-building manual, and the mountain will destroy your work in less than 2 years. The relative humidity hovering near 95% will turn standard wood framing into soft, black rot. The moisture migrating through the stone will sweat through your drywall. And if you dare to light a standard wood stove inside an underground chamber without understanding fluid dynamics, the stagnant air will trap invisible, odorless carbon monoxide until you never wake up. We are going to break down the exact physics, the thermal mechanics, and the engineering safety protocols required to turn raw limestone into a permanent survival homestead. Before we jump into the structural blueprints, hit that subscribe button down below so you never miss a deep breakdown on true off-grid engineering. And right now, drop a comment with your current state or city, and tell me what the thermometer reads on your back porch today. To understand why subterranean engineering is so powerful, we have to look at why conventional surface houses are fundamentally broken. Every summer, millions of homeowners across the United States run their electric meters into the ground, trying to stay cool. In a standard stick-built cabin, your roof deck can easily hit 140 degrees Fahrenheit under direct solar radiation. That heat pushes down through your attic insulation, conducts through wooden ceiling joists, and radiates directly into your living space. You are essentially living inside a giant wooden oven, trying to cool it down with an oversized fan. When the power grid fails during a heat wave or an ice storm knocks out regional supply lines, a surface house rapidly loses its thermal equilibrium. Within 24 hours, an unpowered cabin becomes an uninhabitable shell. Here's what everyone missed. The pioneers who settled the Ozark Plateau in the late 19th century learned this lesson the hard way. Back in the summer of 1888, a historic drought scorched the central states. Record high temperatures over 100 degrees sustained for weeks turned timber frame cabins into baking boxes. Homesteaders watched their milk spoil in hours. Their stored salted meats rancidified in timber barns. Their crops withered, and their draft animals collapsed from heat exhaustion on exposed ridges. The air outside was suffocating, heavy with humidity that made sweating useless. The log cabins of 1888 were built from thick oak logs, notched and chinked with clay. While oak logs provide decent structural strength, wood has an abysmal thermal mass compared to stone. Wood warms up, traps heat, and slowly radiates it back into the room long after the sun goes down in the dead of an 1888 summer night. A log cabin would trap the day's baking heat inside, leaving families tossing in sweat-soaked flannel sheets, gasping for a breeze. Desperate for relief, homesteaders began looking down instead of up. The Ozark region is a massive geological karst formation, a vast plateau underlaid by thick strata of ancient limestone, carved out over millions of years by acidic groundwater. This process left the landscape riddled with thousands of sinkholes, spring-fed caverns, and deep bluff shelters. Homesteaders noticed something remarkable whenever they approached these natural rock apertures. No matter how hot the ridge became, the air emerging from a deep limestone crevice remained shockingly cold. Pioneers began hauling timber down into bluff overhangs. They built subterranean root cellars directly against cold limestone faces. They stored butter, cured hams, and seed grain inside these natural refrigerators. During the worst weeks of the 1888 heat wave, entire families moved their bedding into the mouths of bluff caves just to survive the night. They didn't understand the exact thermodynamics at play, but they knew one thing with absolute certainty. The mountain did not care about the sun. Think about that for a second. The secret lies in a fundamental principle of subterranean physics known as mean annual air temperature. When you stand on the surface of the Earth, the temperature swings violently. Day turns to night. Summer turns to winter, driving surface temperatures up and down by over 100 degrees in a single 6-month cycle. But solar heat only penetrates so deep into the Earth's crust. The top 3 feet of soil fluctuate daily. The top 10 feet of soil fluctuate seasonally. But once you descend 20 to 30 feet below the surface into solid rock, the influence of daily and seasonal solar radiation drops to practically zero. At that depth, the temperature of the stone stabilizes at the exact average of all the surface temperatures experienced over the entire year. In southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, and parts of Kentucky, that mean annual temperature sits precisely between 54 and 56 degrees Fahrenheit. Whether it is 110 degrees in July or minus 15 degrees in January, the rock face 20 feet underground remains locked at 56 degrees. It acts as a thermodynamic flywheel, a battery of pure thermal inertia containing billions of tons of high-density calcium carbonate. When summer heat bakes the surface, heat from the atmosphere slowly tries to migrate into the rock. But because the limestone matrix is so massive, it takes months for a thermal wave to move even a few feet into the cliff face. By the time summer heat reaches a few feet deep, winter has already arrived on the surface, cooling the outer layer back down. The heat wave literally starves before it can ever warm the subterranean chamber. In the winter, the exact opposite happens. Cold winter air freezes the cliff face, but the heat trapped deep inside the stone matrix slowly migrates back toward the interior cave air, preventing the chamber from ever dropping to freezing. It is an infinite, zero electricity, cooling, and heating reservoir provided entirely by planetary mechanics. So why hasn't everyone built their off-grid home inside a limestone bluff? Because the moment you try to live inside that thermal battery, you realize the mountain is trying to drown you. When hot, humid surface air enters a subterranean space where the rock walls are 54 degrees. Something aggressive happens to the moisture in the air. As the warm air cools down against the stone face, its ability to hold water vapor plunges. The relative humidity shoots to 100%, and moisture instantly condenses out of the air. Water droplets form on the ceiling. Streamlets run down the rock walls. Within days, any unprotected lumber you brought into the space starts absorbing water like a sponge. Spores of black mold, dormant for decades, bloom across wooden joists. The air turns thick, dank, and heavy with the smell of wet earth and decay. If you simply frame walls directly against limestone rock, you create a dark, unventilated pocket of standing moisture. Within 18 months, your floor joists rot through, your insulation turns into a wet blanket, and the subterranean air becomes dangerously toxic to human lungs. This was the wall that pioneer builders hit. They could use caves for basic cold storage or temporary shelter, but they couldn't build a permanent, dry, modern living space inside the stone. To make a cave truly habitable, you cannot fight the moisture with paint or waterproof coatings. You have to understand fluid mechanics, vapor pressure gradients, and structural isolation. You have to treat the cave not as a room, but as a dynamic thermodynamic environment. And that brings us to the first phase of construction, clearing the host rock and engineering a house that never actually touches the mountain. Before a single board could be cut, or a single anchor drilled, the mountain demanded a clearance audit. Natural limestone caverns are not static rooms. They are living geological formations under constant, grinding mechanical stress. Moisture seeping through microfissures in the calcium carbonate rock freezes during winter surface dips, expands, and fractures the outer layers of the ceiling. Over centuries, this creates friable spall-thin, razor-sharp slabs of loose limestone hanging from the ceiling like suspended guillotine blades, waiting for the slightest thermal shift or vibration to send them crashing down. The first step was structural scaling, equipped with 6-foot steel pinch bars, heavy sledges, and protective hard hats. Every square inch of the cavern roof and upper walls had to be manually sounded. Tapping a steel bar against sound limestone produces a high-pitched, metallic ring that echoes clearly through the dark chamber. But tapping against friable spall produces a dull, hollow thud. For 3 straight days, the dark vault echoed with the sound of steel impacting stone, followed by the thunderous crash of multi-hundred-pound slabs collapsing onto the gravel floor below. Over 6 tons of loose rock were pried away until only solid, unbroken host bedrock remained overhead. Only then could construction begin. But the golden rule of subterranean engineering was already in effect. The house could never touch the stone. If you lay a traditional concrete slab or wood sill plate directly onto a cave floor, ground moisture will migrate straight up into your flooring via capillary action. To bypass this, the entire foundation was designed as an elevated, floating steel frame. Heavy-duty polymer structural pedestals, the kind used in industrial high-rise decking, were set across the gravel floor. These pedestals are height-adjustable, rot-proof, and rated to support over 2,500 pounds each. On top of these pedestals sits a grid of heavy-gauge structural steel joists, elevated 8 inches above the raw stone bed. Underneath this floating subfloor lies an open drainage channel lined with coarse aggregate gravel and a perforated perimeter pipe. Any groundwater that seeps through the limestone floor during heavy spring rains simply drops beneath the house, flows into the gravel trench, and drains passively toward a natural lower siphon at the back of the cavern. The floor of the tiny house stays entirely dry, elevated above the subterranean water table on a bed of air and steel. Let that sink in. The house doesn't fight the water. It lets the mountain flow underneath it without ever touching a single piece of living space. Next came the most critical enclosure mechanic, the 3-inch continuous ventilated air gap. Standard homebuilders make a catastrophic mistake when trying to convert underground spaces. They try to slap insulation directly against the cold rock or spray foam straight onto wet limestone. But when cold, wet rock is sealed off without air circulation. Hydrostatic pressure builds, trapping liquid water against your framing. Instead, light-gauge galvanized steel wall studs were erected 3 inches away from the rock faces. This 3-inch void creates an unbroken vertical chimney gap behind the entire home. Cold, heavy ambient cave air enters the bottom of the gap, sweeps upward along the damp stone wall, absorbs migrating moisture vapor, and vents out toward the cavern mouth through a dedicated low-wattage booster duct. By keeping air moving behind the walls, condensation is swept away before it can ever pool into standing liquid. With the ventilation gap secured, the thermal envelope required total vapor isolation. Light-gauge steel studs were used exclusively for the structural frame. Wood framing was completely banned from the structural shell. Even treated lumber can absorb ambient moisture in a 95% humidity environment, leading to gradual warping, fastener corrosion, and eventual structural failure. Steel studs, galvanized with a zinc coating, are completely immune to subterranean decay and mold colonization. Over the exterior face of the steel studs, facing the cold rock wall, a continuous curtain of high-density 15 mil poly vapor barrier was sealed with butyl tape. Every joint, every electrical outlet box, and every fastener penetration was taped and inspected to create a completely airtight, vapor-impermeable shield. Then came the thermal insulation layer. 3 inches of closed-cell polyurethane spray foam was applied directly into the steel stud cavities over the vapor barrier, expanding with a high-pitched, soft hiss into every microscopic gap. Closed-cell foam was chosen for 2 specific physical properties. First, it delivers an exceptional thermal resistance rating of R7 per inch, giving the 3-inch wall an overall rating of R21. Second, unlike open-cell foam or fiberglass bats, closed-cell spray foam forms a dense, rigid matrix of hydrophobic cells that will not absorb water vapor even if submerged. The resulting wall assembly is a multi-tier engineering sandwich. From the outside in, you have wet 54-degree limestone, a 3-inch pressure-ventilated air gap, a 15 mil poly vapor barrier, 3 inches of rigid closed-cell polyurethane foam, a galvanized steel frame, and, finally, pre-sealed interior wall panels treated with non-organic antimicrobial coatings. To hold these walls rigid without transmitting cold or moisture from the host rock, custom wall anchors were engineered. Standard masonry bolts driven into limestone act as thermal bridges, pulling 54-degree cold straight into your interior wall framing. To stop this cold conduction, stainless steel mechanical expansion anchors were driven into the bedrock through thick rubber isolator bushings and high-density neoprene washers. These bushings decouple the steel wall studs from the mountain, dampening minor earth vibrations, stopping thermal bridging, and preventing physical contact between the framing and the rock. The result is a completely self-supporting interior building envelope, a structure anchored inside a living mountain, yet existing in its own isolated, dry, thermal climate zone. With the structural shell isolated and dry, the build turned to the most dangerous challenge of all: heating a home inside an underground chamber without creating a fatal gas trap. If you light a standard open fire, a charcoal stove, or an unvented gas heater inside an underground cave, you are signing your own death warrant. To understand why, you have to understand the thermal fluid dynamics of subterranean air and the lethal mechanics of the subterranean stack effect. In a surface house, warm air inside the home rises up through a traditional vertical chimney. Because the outside surface air is typically cooler or moving, the warm gas in the flue creates a natural pressure differential, a thermal draft that safely pulls carbon monoxide and combustion byproducts up and out into the open sky. But inside a cave, atmospheric dynamics operate in reverse. Deep underground, the mass of the rock maintains a dense, heavy pocket of cool air. In the winter, when outside surface air drops to sub-zero temperatures, the cold outside air becomes heavier and denser than the air inside the subterranean space. The heavy outside air tries to sink down into the cavern mouth, creating a high-pressure cold wedge that blocks the top of your chimney. If you light a stove inside a subterranean tiny house, under these conditions, the cold air pressing down from the surface can overpower the heat draft in your chimney. The stack effect reverses. Instead of smoke and carbon monoxide rising up the flue, cold atmospheric air pushes down through the pipe, forcing black smoke, sulfur dioxide, and odorless carbon monoxide straight back out of the firebox, filling the living space within minutes. And carbon monoxide inside an underground space is exponentially more dangerous than on the surface. In a surface house, leaky windows, door gaps, and soffit vents provide passive air infiltration that can slow down gas accumulation. But inside a cave, air exchange is severely restricted. Once carbon monoxide escapes into the room, it does not dissipate. It builds, layer by layer, displaces breathable oxygen, and settles silently across the floor. Carbon monoxide binds to human hemoglobin with a chemical affinity over 200 times stronger than oxygen. You do not smell it, you do not taste it. You simply feel a mild headache, followed by sudden drowsiness. And within 45 minutes of exposure at concentrations over 400 parts per million, your brain starves of oxygen. To solve this fatal physics trap, a closed-loop combustion direct intake heating system was engineered from the ground up. The first rule of subterranean combustion safety: the stove must never pull air from inside the house. A custom sealed firebox wood stove was installed, featuring a fully gasketed, airtight cast iron door. But instead of drawing combustion oxygen from the living room, a dedicated 4-inch insulated steel intake pipe was core-drilled straight through the front wall, running directly to the open atmosphere outside the cavern mouth. When a fire burns inside the stove, it pulls fresh, oxygen-rich air directly from the outside sky, burns it inside the sealed firebox, and pushes the exhaust gases out through a dedicated insulated flue. The indoor air supply is completely decoupled from the combustion process. You could burn a roaring fire inside the stove for 12 hours straight without consuming a single cubic foot of indoor oxygen. To ensure the chimney draft never reverses even during extreme surface pressure swings, a double wall, Class A stainless steel chimney pipe was installed. The inner pipe is constructed from high-grade stainless steel, surrounded by 2 inches of dense ceramic wool insulation, and encased in an outer stainless sleeve. The heavy insulation serves a critical physical purpose. It keeps the exhaust gases inside the flue burning hot above 300 degrees Fahrenheit all the way from the firebox to the sky outside the cavern mouth. By keeping flue gases scorching hot, the thermal buoyancy inside the chimney remains immensely strong. The hot gas shoots upward at high velocity, easily breaking through any cold air pressure wedge at the surface, maintaining a powerful, unbroken upward draft regardless of outside weather conditions. A smoke pencil draft test proved the physics. When a smoke source was placed near the sealed stove door, the draft pulled the smoke violently into the intake circuit, confirming that zero combustion gas could ever escape into the room. The numbers don't lie. Even with perfect fluid mechanics, subterranean life safety demands zero room for error. A redundant, dual-technology atmospheric monitoring system was integrated directly into the home's electrical grid, backed up by long-life lithium battery reserves. First, industrial-grade carbon monoxide sensors were mounted at 2 distinct vertical heights. One sensor was installed at 5 feet breath level for a seated adult. A second sensor was mounted 12 inches off the floor. Because air density shifts and thermal currents inside an underground space can cause gas stratification, dual-height sensors guarantee early detection regardless of where gas layering occurs. These sensors are calibrated to trigger an 85 decibel audible alarm at a threshold of just 30 parts per million, far below the OSHA dangerous exposure limit. Second, an oxygen depletion sensor was installed into the main living zone. Normal atmospheric air contains roughly 20.9% oxygen. If oxygen levels inside the home drop below 19.5%, whether due to ventilation failure or gas displacement, the sensor triggers an automatic shutoff relay, cutting off all auxiliary power, starting an emergency fresh air intake fan, and sounding an alarm that can be heard outside the cavern mouth. Every pipe, every joint, every sensor was tested, audited, and verified. The mountain was sealed out, the air was controlled, the fire was tamed. And then, the worst winter storm in 30 years hit the ridge. It arrived in late January with less than 6 hours of warning. A severe Arctic vortex drops south from the Canadian Shield, pushing a wall of dense, polar air across the central states. On the surface, conditions degraded at a terrifying speed. By mid-afternoon, the sun was completely blotted out by heavy, slate-gray storm clouds. The wind whipped up across the Ozark ridges, reaching sustained gale-force speeds of 50 miles per hour. By midnight, the surface thermometer outside the cave mouth had plunged to minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chill values pushing effective temperatures down past minus 35. Ice accumulated on high-voltage power lines along the county highway. Under the weight of hundreds of tons of solid ice, main transmission towers groaned, buckled, and collapsed into the snow. Across 3 counties, the electrical grid died completely. For over 70,000 surface residents, the storm was an immediate life-threatening emergency. In standard wood-framed homes, electric furnaces went dark. Within 6 hours, interior temperatures in surface houses dropped into the 30s. Water pipes inside walls froze, expanded, and burst, flooding homes with ice water before freezing solid. Inside the subterranean tiny house, 60 feet below the frozen ridge, the storm was nothing more than a faint whisper. At hour 12 of the blackout, the external sensor mounted on the bluff ledge was recording minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, with screaming 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Horizontal snow battered the entrance overhang, building 4-foot drifts across the gravel approach. Heavy frost coated the limestone entrance ceiling, forming jagged, clear icicles that hung like daggers from the outer rock ledge. Inside the living space, the temperature reading on the wall thermostat read 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The direct intake wood stove was burning a small, steady bed of hardwood embers. Outside, frozen air was drawn into the sealed firebox through the 4-inch intake pipe, heated by combustion, and pushed straight up the insulated double-wall chimney, even with 50-mile-per-hour wind shearing across the top of the flue outside. The 2 inches of dense ceramic wool insulation kept the chimney gases hot, maintaining a powerful, continuous upward draft. Not a single wisp of smoke entered the room. The dual carbon monoxide sensors remained silent, reading 0 parts per million. At hour 36, the true power of the mountain's thermal inertia became undeniable. To test the raw thermodynamic performance of the rock matrix, the wood stove was completely extinguished. The direct air intake damper was closed. All auxiliary power to dehumidification units was cut. The home was left completely unassisted, isolated deep inside the host rock, while minus 15-degree weather continued to hammer the surface ridge. 12 hours passed without fire or electricity, then 24 hours, then 36 hours. On the surface, an unpowered cabin would have dropped to minus 10 degrees, freezing everything inside solid. Inside the cave home, after 36 hours, without a single watt of heat, the interior air temperature had dropped by less than 2 degrees, stabilizing at 55.4 degrees Fahrenheit. The millions of tons of solid limestone surrounding the structure acted as an immovable thermal anchor. The cold surface air simply could not penetrate 40 feet of solid bedrock. The stone mass, holding its mean annual ground temperature, continuously radiated heat back into the insulated air gap, keeping the home suspended in a perpetual 55-degree envelope. To warm the entire house back up to a comfortable 68 degrees, all it took was lighting 3 small split logs of white oak inside the direct intake stove. Within 20 minutes, the radiant cast iron firebox brought the entire indoor space back to room temperature, using less wood than a surface cabin burns in 2 hours. While the surface world above was locked in a frozen, blacked-out struggle for survival, life inside the mountain remained completely undisturbed. When the storm finally cleared after 72 hours and grid power was restored, the empirical data was pulled from the multi-channel thermal logging array. The numbers don't lie, and the log data laid bare the radical difference between surface living and subterranean engineering. Over the course of a full 12-month testing cycle, The surface air sensor recorded a maximum high temperature of 105.8 degrees Fahrenheit in August, and a minimum low temperature of minus 14.2 degrees Fahrenheit in January. That represents an extreme surface temperature swing of over 120 degrees. During that exact same 12-month period, the thermal sensors bolted directly to the subterranean limestone rock face recorded a high of 56.1 degrees Fahrenheit and a low of 54.2 degrees. A total rock face variance of just 1.9 degrees across an entire year. Inside the unconditioned tiny home shell, the air temperature mirrored the rock face with absolute precision, remaining at a baseline of 56.5 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of sun, rain, wind, or snow. When conditioned for human occupation, the entire energy budget required to maintain a continuous, comfortable interior climate of 68 degrees Fahrenheit with 45% relative humidity came down to a single electrical draw, a compact, 40-watt continuous dehumidifier, paired with less than half a cord of firewood for the entire winter. The cooling bill during the peak of summer heat waves, when surface homeowners were paying $400 a month for power, was precisely $0. The limestone host rock absorbed every single BTU of indoor heat passively, day after day, month after month. It is a living demonstration of what happens when architecture stops fighting planetary thermodynamics and starts utilizing them. Modern surface home construction is built on a foundation of extreme brittleness. We construct paper-thin wooden boxes on exposed ridges, wrap them in synthetic plastic, and rely on a fragile, complex electrical grid to pump thousands of watts of energy into them every hour just to keep them habitable. The second that grid flickers, the illusion of shelter collapses. Earth coupling is not a new idea. It is the oldest, most proven survival technology on planet Earth. For thousands of years, before synthetic insulation or electrical grids existed, humanity survived catastrophic climatic shifts by retreating into the thermal stability of the Earth's crust. By merging modern materials science, like closed-cell polyurethane foam, structural steel framing, direct intake combustion, and digital atmospheric monitoring with ancient subterranean mechanics, we can build homes that are virtually indestructible, completely energy independent, and naturally climate-controlled. However, a strict warning must be delivered to anyone considering subterranean construction. Building inside solid rock is a high-risk engineering discipline governed by strict physical and geological laws. You cannot simply find a cave, move in a mattress, and light a fire. Unmanaged subterranean rock faces carry severe hazards of structural ceiling failure, toxic radon gas accumulation, lethal dampness, and catastrophic carbon monoxide asphyxiation. Any subterranean build requires formal structural geology assessments to verify rock stability, professional radon testing, and mitigation pathways, strict adherence to local building codes, and custom-engineered, direct intake ventilation systems designed by qualified mechanical safety specialists. When executed with engineering precision, the result is something truly timeless. A home that sits silently inside the mountain, unaffected by the baking sun, immune to freezing gales, holding a quiet, steady line against whatever weather the surface world chooses to throw against it. A house that forgot what summer heat and winter cold ever felt like.